Chapter 14-17. Duque had no choice but to do this. Originally, the most efficient way of transportation was by air transport ships, which could transport hundreds to thousands of tons of supplies at once. The problem was that the skies of the Outland were simply monstrous. On January 2nd, a sudden elemental storm directly caused 4 transport ships to fall from a height of 500 meters, smashing into pieces. The 4 ships, including soldiers and civilians, lost a total of more than 1,200 people. On January 5th it happened again. This time it was 2 flying destroyers that suffered. They were blown horizontally for nearly 1,000 meters, and finally crashed into each other, both of them crashing into each other. As a last resort, Duque ordered the flying fleet to lower their cruising altitude. However, this attracted the harassment of the outland birds. When land transportation became important, the Nagas came to cause trouble again. Duque had to discuss with the leaders of the alliance to deal with Vasht first. In the command post of the Windrunner Fortress, the leaders of the alliance used a video conference method similar to Duque's before he transmigrated. First, Ilucia reported the alliance's losses and resource consumption in the Outland War. We have transported 32,000 tons of various supplies through the Dark Portal every month. Due to the transportation conditions, 30% of them are invested in Salma to support the newly captured Fel Orcs. 45% are held back in Fort Glory due to transportation. Before Fort Glory the loss ratio was 5%. After leaving Fort Glory, this number immediately jumped to 26%. It was not a heavy loss, but the severe supply problem meant that the Alliance could not further increase their troops, at least not far away from the Hellfire Peninsula. Vasht controlled Zenger Marsh, tightly choking the throat of the Alliance. Then it was Brian who announced the failure of filling the Serpent Lake in frustration. Obviously, the water is Vasht's domain. No matter how many airships we send or how many tons of sand we throw in, she will roll up a whirlpool and discharge the sand from a certain place. Maybe it smashed into our ships, or maybe it was thrown to the edge of the westernmost road. Anyway, after 2 weeks of work, the water lines of the Snake Lake have not changed at all. And the diesel of our flying ships is starting to run out. Duque could not do anything about diesel. After killing Ragnaro's doppelganger, the Alliance found the largest oil field in the southern continent. They were the Burning Plains and the Scorching Canyon. Without the interference of the fire elementals, under the defense of the Iron Furnace Castle dwarves, the Scorching Canyon was the first to build a large number of oil wells. Crude oil less than 50 meters below the surface was easy to extract. However, due to technical issues, they could only produce 5,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Similarly, because of the poor refining technology, the success rate of the diesel was even worse. Unfortunately, the air pressure in the outer realm was low, and the steam engine was not very useful. As a result, every time the air fleet launched a large-scale attack, they would have to accumulate several days' worth of diesel. Boulang was helpless against William's repeated requests to clear a way out. This kind of bitterness was hard to describe with words. At this moment, William said, "I suggest that the Alliance organize a team of heroes to break into the Serpent Temple." I knew that this could very well be a trap set by the Burning Legion. I couldn't even rule out the possibility that Kil'jaeden's true body had arrived. But we only have 2 choices left. One is to take the risk and attack to get rid of the nail that is Vasht, the second is to retreat, close the door of darkness, and directly endure until the entire Outland is completely destroyed. The conference room fell silent. The current situation was very different from the first generation of the Dark Portal. At that time, the Alliance still had kings who could not fight at all, such as Old Man Tarinas. The big shots of the Alliance at this point in time were basically the group of people who could fight the best in the entire Alliance. If it was in Azeroth, there was still the planet's protection array and Elun to help watch over it. Here, a demon commander of Kil'jaeden's level could really descend at will. Putting all the strong people on the line meant putting in all the kings. Once they were all wiped out, the Alliance would collapse. It was funny to say that they would retreat. Although there were only 7 or 8 large areas left on Draenor's planet, and the edges were collapsing every day, the strange energy field was still wrapped around this huge continent, and it was floating in the void. Only God knew how long it would take for it to be completely destroyed. Maybe it would be a year, maybe it would be 100 years. Who dared to say that the Door of Darkness was the only spatial flaw in Azeroth? Who dared to say that they could definitely defend the Door of Darkness for that long? Unknowingly, all eyes fell on Duque's face. Duque did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked Valen, "Can you contact Kale? It's very difficult," Valen answered directly. "It's difficult, but it's possible." "That's right." Draenor is a world that is being destroyed. Although I respect the Draenei's attachment to Shotrath City, for the future of the Draenei, and to reduce the supply pressure on the Alliance's front line, I hope that Sir Valen can arrange for no less than 30,000 Draenei to migrate to Azeroth. If possible, it's best to use your starships. Valen's eyes widened slightly. Thank you very much for the Alliance's acceptance. I wonder where the Alliance is going to arrange for my people? The breathing of the Alliance's bigwigs became slightly faster. After all, the Alliance was a group of kingdoms. If the Draenei were placed in a kingdom, it might affect the development of their own kingdom. Even if it was not within the current borders, they did not want a group of refugees to occupy the expansion space of their own kingdom. The Lordaeron continent obviously could not. Even in the eastern part of the hinterlands, which had not yet been colonized, the Wildhammer dwarves also hoped to bring the entire hinterlands into the territory of the Eagle Nest Mountain Kingdom after killing the forest trolls there. The southern continent could not do it either. With the development of industry and the demand for minerals and oil, the territory of the Bronzebeard dwarves was far larger than it had been in history. Now the barren lands had a railway from Loch Moden directly to the Scorching Canyon. These two places were already under the actual control of the Bronzebeard dwarves. When the opportunity came, they would announce this to the Alliance. After Ragnaros left, Stormwind also expanded north from the Reedridge Mountains, bringing the Burning Steppes into their territory. In the southernmost Stranglethorn Vale, after all the trolls in Zul, Gurub were dead, Stormwind would divide Stranglethorn Vale equally with Kurtiras. In fact, this was because Varian wanted to repay Kurtiras for helping the people of Stormwind to evacuate during the first battle of the Dark Portal, so that the Stormwind Kingdom would not be destroyed. Otherwise, why would he give away the meat in his mouth? So when Valen asked this question, most of the kings of the Alliance were a little nervous. Duque smiled and raised his hand to display a large 3D map of the world of Azeroth. When Duque's finger moved to the Kalimdor continent, the kings secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The place to settle the Draenei is here. Duque pointed to a medium-sized island southwest of Darnassus. Chapter 14:18. Blue Mystic Island. A place far away from the mainland but not isolated from the Alliance. The big shots of the Alliance took a look and immediately realized that the location of this place was very good. The Draenei had been persecuted and hunted down, so they would more or less feel insecure. A place that was not directly connected to the tribe's borders would increase their sense of security. But they were not drifting away from the Alliance's control. This was because Darnassus was less than 100 kilometers northeast of Blue Mystic Island. The entire sea was under the protection of the Elves' Black Sea Coast Fleet. Although the Kalimdor continent was to the east, the Black Sea Coast and Grey Valley were the Elves' territory. By placing the Draenei here, they would be able to support the Night Elves. If the Alliance and the tribe fell out in the future, the Night Elves would not have to face the entire tribe alone in Kalimdor. Everyone saw Tyron's calm face and immediately knew that Duque had already obtained the permission of the Night Elves and Elune. Everyone said the same thing in their hearts. A choice that kills 3 birds with 1 stone. A choice filled with political foresight. Valen bowed deeply. On behalf of my people, I would like to express my deepest gratitude once again. The Draenei did not reject immigrants. 25,000 years of exile had long been imprinted in the deepest part of every Draenei's soul. To be able to have a safe place to live and reproduce was the greatest kindness. Sending away 30,000 refugees would undoubtedly make the front lines more plentiful. Next, it was naturally the crucial part. William, your proposal to gather all our forces is very courageous and charismatic. This was a compliment from an elder. William nodded. Thank you. Combat power is a must. So, William, I hope that you can gather the existing hero-level powerhouses in the Outland, including the powerhouses of the tribe, together with the most elite flying fleet and landing troops, and defend here for 3 days. Duque waved his hand and the map had already switched to the Outland. The location of his finger was right in the middle of Zangarmarsh. Ruins of the Twin Towers? The ruins of the Twin Towers were located to the south of the Serpent Lake, right beside the lake. To be honest, this was definitely the hinterland of Vasht's territory. It was easier said than done to go deep into the enemy's territory and defend under their eyes for 3 days. Because it was right beside the lake, Vasht could fully unleash her power in water battles. I really can't take it anymore. Big waves sweep over at the slightest provocation. If he was pulled into the lake by something like an octopus tentacle, he would be able to reincarnate and prepare for the next round of his life. What kind of support can we get? William asked cautiously. Let's wait until the tribe arrives. Duque revealed a mysterious smile. That afternoon, the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde held a conference. After Duque made this suggestion, Sal agreed without hesitation. Sal was a rational leader. Putting aside the interests of the race, he was also a person who valued friendship. Now, the hundreds of thousands of evil beastmen in Salma were relying on the Alliance's supplies, and their situation was improving. Although drinking the highly diluted holy water made many evil beastmen vomit and have diarrhea, the intermittent drinking of the diluted holy water and having enough food to replenish their bodies made the evil beastmen's demonic addiction better. What was rare was that the Alliance didn't lie to the tribes. If it was in the past, under the pressure of food, he might have used some old rations to make up the numbers. Now, the Alliance used this year's brand new autumn rations and a large amount of frozen pork as supplies. It was very heartwarming. On the other hand, in Orgrimmar, Varrock, Salyafar and Grom heard that hundreds of thousands of their compatriots were in urgent need of food supplements and diluted holy water to detoxify. They launched a large-scale operation to support their compatriots. The Alliance's resources weren't free. All the supplies had to be paid by the tribes with ores and other resources. New rations and old rations were not the same price. The Alliance clearly marked the price in this regard, and they were fair to both the old and the young. Moreover, Duque waved his hand and even excluded the losses along the way, and charged them according to the current standard. In this regard, the Horde had nothing to say. Therefore, Varrock and the other tribes that stayed behind launched a campaign to let their compatriots eat better. As long as they had food, it was fine. They took the initiative to propose that the Alliance's disaster relief supplies be replaced with old rations. One had to know that old rations were the Alliance's war rations. According to the technology of this era, if it was left in the barn for more than 5 years, it would definitely go moldy. Usually when the Alliance's food was about to rot, they would throw it to the pigs. Therefore, the price of old rations was only 1/10 of the new rations. In the magic message, when Sal saw his compatriots in Azeroth gnawing on black old rations and black bread, coupled with the few prey in Duroder and the barren lands as meat to fill their stomachs, a big man like Sal cried out. In this regard, Duque was also speechless for a long time. But the Alliance had been through a series of wars, and food had begun to run short. They really couldn't come up with so much new rations to help the Horde. Moreover, the previous insect disaster had almost wiped out the wild creatures of most of the Kalimdor continent. Sigh. Even so, Sal still owed the Alliance a favor. With the addition of the Horde's powerhouses, this time the Battle of the Twin Tower ruins could gather about 20 heroes. More than enough to defend but not enough to attack. For Duque this was enough. On the 20th of January, year 24 of the Dark Portal, the movements of the Alliance army alarmed the entire Serpent Temple. What? The Alliance dares to build a base in front of our house? After hearing the news, Vashj didn't know whether to be angry or to laugh. When she brought half of her body out of the Serpent Lake with her men, she was stunned by the scene in front of her. The way the Alliance built a base was simply unheard of. First, the mages used a magic fog to cover their vision, and then a group of dwarven engineers secretly descended, using bulldozers to forcefully flatten the entire area around the Twin Tower ruins. Then, as 12 giant transport ships swayed and landed under the cover of other flying ships, a large number of Horde infantry, Alliance gunners and archers rushed out of the transport ships and set up a battle formation. Then, 6 smaller Auras showed their true colors as earth-drilling bugs, digging holes in the designated places. Entering here, exiting there. Once they finished digging, they immediately scrammed. A large number of dwarven craftsmen were in place, and then the other 12 transport ships actually hoisted a huge sentry tower that was more than 15 meters tall, inserting the sharp foundation into the hole that the smaller Auras had just dug. These sentry towers were all built in Fort Glory. They were reinforced concrete, and any one of them weighed more than 100 tons. Unreasonably, the dwarves directly used Deity's Descent to catch the sentry tower. Even if it was the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they would still hold it straight, using manpower to correct the deviation and finally pouring in cement. After pouring in the cement, Pharaoh ran over on the spot and directly used frost magic to cool it down. When the 12 sentry towers were set up, less than half an hour had passed. At this time, Vashj had just come out of the Serpent Temple. Chapter 1419. Vashj, who knew nothing about modern industry, was dumbfounded when she saw this scene. It was clear that if the Allied forces were not stopped, they would be able to build a decent small fortress in a day at most. However, the surprise was short-lived. Master. The Deepwater Lord Carithres asked Vashj in a low voice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter? Vashj smiled seductively. What's the point of catching these mortals? Can they pose a real threat to the Serpent Shrine Temple? Or do you want to see me kill these lowly ants with my demigod body? Of course not, Your Majesty. Carithres bowed his head deeply. One of her slender arms was gently raised, forming a graceful arc. Vashj made her decision. Once 5 or more heroic domain powerhouses appear, drown it. As you wish. The Alliance engineers were also trembling with fear. Hey, do you think those 6-armed long tails will come out in full force? Don't worry, Sir Marcus said they won't come out. Oh. What the engineers were doing was very much like stacking blocks. Pieces of 2-meter square prefabricated steel plates were connected with screws, placed in predetermined positions, and then poured cement into them like sandwiched biscuits. A fortress covering an area of about 1 square kilometer rose from the ground almost at a speed visible to the naked eye. For a whole day, not a single Naga floated to the surface to openly peep at the fortress. Perhaps there were, but it was impossible to detect them from under the water. The Allied Army security force rotated every hour as usual. Just that every hour the tower behind them would rise by 1 floor. There were 12 arrow towers in the outer layer. When the reinforced concrete wall connecting these arrow towers was completed, 12 taller arrow towers immediately appeared in the gap between the arrow towers. After the completion of the 24 arrow towers, a second layer of walls was immediately built in the inner circle, and 6 mysterious magic towers were erected inside. Layer after layer, as if skewered, the prefabricated parts were inlaid. With each additional layer, the dazzling colorful patterns on the magic towers became brighter. Until the 10th floor. Of course, this wasn't a mage tower in the traditional sense where mages could live, conduct experiments, and defend against enemies. It was a mage tower that could be used for both offense and defense. This was a pure magic power amplifier. It used high-purity magic crystals in conjunction with a huge magic formation to upgrade every single spell cast by Pharaoh, who was in charge of the Magus Tower, from personal spells to war spells. There were many times when Morogar Tidewalker wanted to charge forward, but Carithres held him back. There's no hurry. There was no hurry. Now this group of worthless soldiers couldn't even be considered as appetizers. We must be patient. Almost at the same time, in the Telrador fortress in the central part of Zanger Marsh, the powerhouses of the Alliance and the Horde had already gathered. This stronghold, which originally belonged to the Drenii, had now become the Allied army's forward base because of someone's order to fill up the lake. The fortress was situated at the top of an incomparably huge stone mushroom. It looked so tall that it was unreachable. The mushroom's roots, which had been reinforced by dozens of defensive spells, were even more indestructible. If an existence below the level of a true god were to come over, they could forget about shaking it in the slightest. In the hall where the powerhouses of the Horde rested, Sal was calmly cleaning his famous hammer of destruction. He used forceps produced by the Alliance to carefully clean the minced meat stuck to the side of the square-shaped hammer. Although the high temperature of the hammer would turn everything into charcoal, biological fats were hard to burn. Over time there would always be some jelly left behind. Are you ready? Orgrim came in and asked. I'm always ready, Sal replied calmly. Surprisingly, they didn't talk about this mission. Obviously, the Alliance and the Horde's positions were always different, but they chose to believe in Duque without reservation. As a leader, he would never be stingy to predict his enemies and his allies for the worst. Because a leader would never represent a single person but a large group. Only in this way those who trusted him and gave their lives and souls to him would not die in vain because of the leader's wrong trust. A mature leader should never trust any outsiders. After all, when you trust your allies more than you trust yourself, then you can talk about having absolute trust in your allies. This wasn't an easy thing to do. Whether it was Sal or Orgrim, they all believed in Duque. They believed that he had an absolute trump card that could deal with Vashj. Sal's adjutant came. Great Chief, the Alliance's Storm King Varian is waiting for you outside. I'll be right there. Sal strode out with the powerhouses of the Horde and saw each other in military attire. Everyone's face was filled with determination. Every pair of eyes was filled with absolute confidence. This was the determination that only those who had gone through thousands of hardships and been baptized by more than one cruel battle would have. Varian's hands were on the hilts of his 2 divine longswords, and his eyes were like lightning. It's time. Sal nodded. Let's go. With the strongest mage of the Horde, Anastrian, in the lead, the Pharaoh of the Alliance and the Horde cast a spell together and opened a portal that could allow 4 carriages to pass through side by side. On the other side of the portal was the brand new small fortress built on the ruins of the Twin Towers. As soon as the Sun King arrived at the fortress, He immediately flashed to the Mage Tower in the south of the central square of the fortress. One could see that with the fortress as the center, a huge flame shield with a diameter of more than 2 kilometers quickly formed. The huge fortress looked like a huge fireball from afar. Surrounded by a group of powerhouses of the Alliance, the great astromancer Solarian hugged the air. The pair of delicate and soft palms were facing a large crystal awl that was at least 3 stories tall. The purple awl emitted surging arcane energy waves that caught everyone's attention. Whoosh, 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 circle after circle, it surged outwards like a tide. Arriving at the center of the square, Solarian's every step agitated the magic array that had been engraved on the ground, causing an even greater arcane reaction. When Solarian let go of her hands and let the 10-meter-long awl slowly fall into the center of the magic array, a zigzagging bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the purple-black sky above the ruins of the Twin Towers. An immeasurable amount of elements gathered here at high speed, causing the thin clouds to suddenly become visible to the naked eye. The clouds boiled like thick porridge. When the boiling reached its peak in just a few seconds, a purple-blue light spot suddenly appeared in the sky directly above the top of the crystal awl. As if an entire mountain had fallen into the water, the arcane energy from the light spot set off waves of energy in the air, spreading out for several miles. Chapter 1420. What is that? The Deepwater Lord Carithres, who was quietly monitoring the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress a kilometer away, let out a scream. There was no existence around him that could answer his question. All the powerhouses of the Serpent Shrine Cavern were dumbfounded as they stared at the fortress helplessly. Boom! As if there was an earthquake, the entire fortress trembled. Carithres, who floated to the surface of the water at high speed, looked at the surrounding lake in bewilderment. There was no accident. In his field of vision, a conspicuous ripple was quickly forming a huge wave, spreading from the direction of the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress towards the entire Serpent Lake. That was definitely not a wave caused by the wind. What are those guys doing? Do they want to shake the entire continent even further? No one could answer him. In the entire Serpent Shrine Cavern, apart from his queen and that blind man, no leader had a higher IQ than an ordinary human. The Deepwater Lord was a little frightened. If he was not mistaken, Delano had become like this because Kill Jaden had sent a human bomb to Duque. In the end, Duque had rejected it and sent it to the Dark Portal and blown it up, turning the huge planet into a few connected pieces that were suspended in the void in a crooked manner. Carithres really hoped that the knowledge of the earthquake just now was his illusion, but very soon he sadly found another example: the swamp. The entire Zanger Marsh, which used to be bustling and always had murderous intents even when it was quiet, was now quiet. Then a buzzing sound came from the southern shore, as well as the deeper waters of the Serpent Lake. Perhaps it was the bottom of the water? He could not be sure. At this moment, the second wave of tremors came as expected. The cause of the tremors this time was even clearer. Fire, frost, arcane, nature, shadow, holy, 6 different elements were mixed in the shockwave that rushed out of the ruins of the Twin Tower Fortress. Every wave, every inch of ripple, had a high concentration of elements. For many unranked mages, these waves could be considered some kind of low-level magic. The elemental waves brought up by the shockwave rushed out from the entire southern part of the Serpent Lake in 3 directions: north, northwest, and northeast. The momentum of the surging waves did not subside. Carithres estimated that this wave could very likely swing more than 1,000 meters, and even hit the Kolaifang Reservoir buildings 3,000 meters behind him. In the middle of the venomous Snake Lake, there was a 5-pointed star that looked like a starfish from a bird's eye view. That was the Kolaifang Reservoir. Vashch followed Illidan's orders and built many water pumps in Zanger Marsh. The water extracted by all the water pumps was transported to the Kolaifang Reservoir. The purpose was to pump all the water up to carry out a mysterious mission. No. Don't even think about getting in the way of the Lord's great cause. Carithres rushed to the surface of the water and roared. He waved the giant hammer in his hand, and an arrow of disaster hit the towering waves in front of him. The powerful shadow force violently shattered the waves, but even more elemental waves came from other directions. No, Carithres was horrified to find that in the face of this level of elemental wave, he could only protect himself. He couldn't help but yell, then turned around and looked at the horizon. Dozens of seconds later, the towering elemental wave was like a bulldozer's shovel, slamming into the Kolaifang Reservoir's water pump. Standing in the middle of the venomous Snake Lake, the dark yellow water pump that was 5 stories high was like a willow branch in the wind. It could only shake wildly, and in less than 3 to 5 seconds, It completely fell apart with a bang, turning into a pile of rubble with magic runes and starting to sink. No. It's the Serpent Shrine Temple down there. Karathres was about to go crazy. In fact, it wasn't just the Kolaifang Reservoir's water pump that was affected. The elemental wave triggered by the ruins of the Twin Towers formed a tsunami-like existence. Stone mushrooms that were more than 10 stories high were collapsing and collapsing. The waterways that originally divided the land of the swamp were filled with water, overflowing the low slopes. But following the thunderous tremors, Naga, who was hiding at the bottom of the water not far away, felt that the underwater world she was familiar with had changed. The water was no longer just water. It was a terrifying existence filled with destructive elemental energy. The small fishes and shrimps in the venomous snake lake, as long as they were within the range of the elemental wave, all died instantly. But the various water elemental creatures were greatly strengthened. Including the unstable Hydus, all the water elemental creatures of the Serpent Shrine Temple had become one size larger. This should have been a good thing. If the bosses of the Serpent Shrine Temple knew that this was the inadvertent leakage of elemental magic when the newly built magic net called in magic, then probably no one would be in a good mood. At this moment, only the truly strong could sense that the elemental laws of most of the venomous snake lake were deviating. They were fearfully leaving the control of the few natural laws of the outer realm, turning to yield to the mysterious power that was descending. No group of wandering elements could resist that unparalleled mysterious power. The existence that appeared to be from Shotrath City, but was actually from the distant Azeroth planet, Karazhan, announced with an incomparably domineering appearance that he was dominating everything around him and taking over almost all the elements nearby. At the gate of the Serpent Shrine Temple, any existence that wanted to come here would first be besieged and blocked by countless underwater creatures. But now there were two huge humanoid existences that suddenly appeared at the gate. Who? The Naga guards, who had been extremely vigilant, shouted angrily. What responded to them was a flash of lightning, a humanoid existence that emitted all kinds of light. Heroic spirits, or elemental guardians would be more appropriate to describe them. By forcibly connecting to the Serpent Shrine Temple with the magic net, Duque was able to directly join his direct subordinates. The heroic spirits that relied on him in Karazhan, after injecting a large amount of elemental energy into their souls, reappeared in this world as elemental guardians. Kill? Destroy evil. There were not many of them, only about 100 people, but with the momentum of a tsunami, they directly drowned the Naga guards blocking the way. Whether it was the burly male Naga waving large long-handled weapons, or the Naga mages using all kinds of strange magic, no one was a match for them. At this time, a dark swamp giant blocked in front of the intruders. It was a 2-story tall dark green humanoid creature with 3 fingers and disgusting pustules all over its body. Its poison, its natural magic, was simply a nightmare for ordinary creatures. Unfortunately for pure elemental creatures, its skills were all useless. Chapter 1421. The Elemental Guardians advanced like a hurricane. At this moment, the temple gate, which had been silent for a while, suddenly flashed with a brighter and more resplendent light. Countless elemental light balls jumped out from the translucent illusory ends of the weave and then gathered together. First, a huge elemental heart appeared out of thin air under the protection of magic runes that were flying back and forth. Thump, thump. Accompanied by a strong pulse, the energy materialized with fire elements as the dominant energy, constructing the thick arteries and veins of the heart, as well as other internal organs. Then illusory dark brown bones appeared, and rows of ribs protected the newly emerged internal organs well. The next step was the limbs that still retained the characteristics of insects. Then came the tendons and muscles. Layers of what looked like biological substances, but were actually elemental muscles covered the bones composed of high-density elements, giving the body the ability to move. Finally came the skin and bright red armor. Everything seemed to be the perfect interpretation of 3D printing technology. Not only was it done perfectly, but it was also done extremely quickly. In just 2 seconds, 2 3-story tall, seemingly thin giants appeared. Haha. I didn't expect us brothers to regain our bodies so soon. Although it's temporary, it's still great. Right? The ones who appeared here were Duque's number 1 and number 2 thugs, the Karaji twin emperors. Insignificant Naga Vaskia who overestimates her capabilities. Are you ready to face the wrath of our Lord Duke Marcus? A thunderous voice reverberated over the entire Serpent Temple. At this moment, the roaring roar had turned into a violent tremor that affected the entire space. One must know that the bottom of the entire serpent temple was basically water, and only a large pile of wooden and metal buildings on the surface of the water could allow terrestrial creatures to pass through. If they fell into the water, they would attract countless piranhas at any time and devour the unlucky ones who fell into the water. But now, the declaration of the twin emperors directly caused the entire space to shake. It was not just the water beneath the temple. Every building, every pillar, and even every plank of wood seemed to be emitting a deep and ancient sound. They hummed again and again, turning into a unified sound, responding to the declaration of the two emperors. The water at the bottom of the serpent shrine was surging, because the deeper water was also rumbling and shaking, because countless Karaji worms were rushing out of the illusory weave. As soon as they came out, the elements materialized and became strange existences that seemed like real life. They responded to the emperor's call and performed a shocking feat: throw, whip, break, flow. Before I transmigrated, during the Taiyuan era of Emperor Xiaowu of the Eastern Jin dynasty, Fu Jian of the former Qin dynasty unified the north and decided to mobilize 1,000,000 troops to destroy the Eastern Jin dynasty and unify the whole of China. At that time, the emperor's most arrogant words were, "Now I have nearly 1,000,000 troops. Just throwing the horsewhip into the Yangtze River is enough to cut off the river flow. Why should I be afraid of natural hazards?" The current scene was actually not inferior to the legendary cutting off the flow with a whip. The insects the size of small tanks madly rushed into the water, one after another, like martyrs committing mass suicide. If it was a normal creature at the moment of death, perhaps it would hesitate. But they were not. Not to mention that they were already materialized elemental creatures. Even when they were alive, the spiritual connection between the insects and their nature of absolute obedience would drive them to complete their master's orders without hesitation, even if they were told to die. So what if they were attacked and bitten by the piranhas? So what if they felt suffocated and uncomfortable? They almost madly rushed into the water, paddling and rushing with their chelicerae that were not adapted to underwater movement. Even if they could not sink, it did not matter. More of their insect brethren would press down on them from above. If anyone could overlook the entire serpent shrine at this moment, they would find that there was a large mass of ink black spreading in the water at the entrance of the shrine. That was the Karaji insect people carrying out the task of cutting off the flow with a whip. With their enormous bodies in absolute numbers, they easily filled up the body of water in front of the twin emperors that was tens of meters deep, more than 20 meters wide, and more than 300 meters long, forming an insect dam that was hard for bystanders to imagine. "Let's go, my elder brother. Let's go, my younger brother." The two familiar faces under the visors seemed to be smiling. The twin emperors' thin and huge bodies took giant strides, as if they were mirror images of each other. One took a step with his left leg, the other with his right leg, and they walked together onto the black carpet that only belonged to the Karaji emperor. Instead of stepping directly on the insects, the two of them stepped on the elements floating in the void. To put it bluntly, the insect bridge was not a necessity from the beginning to the end. Perhaps this was what it meant to be pretentious. Duque, who was far away in Karazhan, bared his teeth and complained, "Damn, my subordinates actually think that I can pretend?" Beside him, there was the light laughter of several women that sounded like silver bells. The aura of the twin emperors did not matter. Anyway, the strong men under them, no matter how good they could fight, only carried the name of their boss. For the next scene, Duque's mood was very calm. Countless Naga took their weapons and swayed their long snake tails, attempting to surround and attack the twin emperors. At this moment, two majestic, terrible, and ancient auras rose from the twin emperors. The Naga's expressions changed drastically, and they raised their weapons to resist these two auras, but two invisible forces suddenly swept across the entire space, forcibly suppressing all the Naga. This was no longer a matter of being unable to move an inch. This was simply a mandatory law. Without the permission of the twin emperors, let alone raising a sword or a gun, they could not even twitch a muscle. The Naga's bodies were stiff, and they sank to the bottom of the water in this ridiculous way. Why was it ridiculous? Because they were not even allowed to breathe with their cheeks. This scene, let alone the Naga themselves, even any of the leaders in the Serpent Shrine could not believe it. Unable to breathe. Unable to resist. The difference in rank was like the difference between heaven and earth, and even looking up was not enough to see the difference, let alone overturn it. At this moment, a cold aura spread from the depths of the Serpent Shrine. Soon the cold turned into blazing heat. The entire eastern part of the shrine lit up with the flash of thunder, forming a distinct echo with the elemental brilliance of the twin emperors at the main entrance to the west. An elegant female voice sounded, "Oh hee hee. My shrine has never had any decent guests, and I didn't expect 2 demigods to come. Duke Marcus really thinks highly of me." Chapter 1422. Following Vash's voice, the Nagas who had been suppressed by the twin emperors immediately felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Their forcibly stopped breathing resumed, and their forbidden heartbeats also resumed. Every Naga greedily took a deep breath, letting the cold lake water pass through their cheeks so that oxygen could re-enter their blood vessels. At this time, Carithres's magic voice also sounded in Vash's ears. "Your Majesty, I, Carithres, will immediately return to escort you. No need, all of you attack the Alliance's fortress in the ruins of the Twin Towers." "Your Majesty, but..." Vash was obviously sullen. "Idiot. Haven't you discovered the key to the enemy yet? The enemy can descend 2 powerful demigods, the key is that magic prism. Mobilize all combat power, destroy it." This anger was not only directed at Carithres but also at herself. Before this, she really could not imagine that relying on the incomparably huge magic transmission and the souls of 2 genuine demigods, it was actually possible to project demigod-level combat power across the stars. The most disgusting thing was that unless she had the special skill to annihilate souls, as long as Duke's magic did not run out, even if her strength was above the other party, she could only desperately deal with the Twin Emperor's fierce attacks over and over again. Moreover, was her strength really stronger than the Twin Emperor's? Unknowingly, a bean-sized drop of sweat dripped down from Vash's temple. Of course, the most important thing in a battle between peerless experts was momentum. Whoever showed fear first, then there was no need to fight, they could just directly surrender. Vash's faint laughter once again echoed in the sky above the Serpent Shrine Temple. "There's no fun in slaughtering the weak. Come, experts from Azeroth, I, Queen Vash, am waiting for you here on the throne." The twin emperors laughed. "Lead the way." Even if the emperors had bowed their noble knees to Duque, the pride and reserve in their hearts had never been reduced in the slightest. Of course, they could slaughter all the Nagas who approached them, but if it was not necessary, it was a kind of helplessness and humiliation to have their hands stained with the blood of the weak. The metal platform in front of them made an ear-piercing sound, and the metal pillars that were supposed to be permanent buildings began to change shape and move under Vash's mysterious power, turning into bridge piers. The crooked platform straightened at this moment, turning into a smooth path that led straight to the Queen's Hall. The twin emperors leaned back, and a large bug appeared out of thin air behind each of them. The thrones fixed on the bugs' backs caught them perfectly. The insect mount moved its scythe-like long black legs and quickly ran towards Vash's throne. Vash's throne was located in the easternmost hall of the Divine Temple, sitting on a high platform built of 27 steps. The entire platform was surrounded by a circle of green water. If a mortal came here, they would first have to face the endless stream of water elementals, Nagas, swamp striders and other powerful aquatic creatures in the green water. Only then would they be able to step onto the terrifying platform. Today the throne was quiet. There was only a pool of green water that was level with the throne's platform. Even the platform was submerged in water. If a human stood on a high platform, they would have to face knee-deep water. The twin emperors came down from the beetle. The depth of the water was barely above their ankles. "Welcome to the Serpent Shrine Temple, the Kiraji twin emperors Vek Lor and Vek Linolas." A subtle smile appeared on Vash's face, and at the same time she spread out her 6 seemingly petite arms. "We have brought the ultimatum of our lord, Duke Marcus. Surrender or perish." The twin emperors echoed each other. The Naga Queen's 3 opponents showed different situations. The opponent at the bottom had his hands on his hips, and the one in the middle was holding the elbows of the opponent above. Vash's long hair had turned into a terrifying living snake, twisting its body left and right, spitting out its tongue continuously. Vash's exquisite face revealed a playful smile. "Violent fellows. Are you really the subordinates of Duke Marcus who did not hesitate to let go of his great enemy, the Horde, and prioritized fighting against the Burning Legion? If the Insect Emperor's political wisdom is only at this level, I will be very disappointed." The twin emperors were a little confused. After all, the Kiraji insect people generally used a more direct way of thinking. The nature of obeying the strong was branded in the depths of their souls. Thus, even the twin emperors could not understand Vash's deeper meaning. Vash continued to speak to herself. "Women are never creatures who like to be at a disadvantage. Ayaya. You still need to train your thoughts on women." The twin emperors were not annoyed. "Send whoever is suitable to do what? This is a compulsory lesson for those in power. If we try our best and still fail, It proves that the enemy is beyond our master's imagination, or that our master has made a wrong choice. From beginning to end there is only one thing we have to do, that is to deal with you. Vashti's lips curved into a playful smile. If I meet you in other places I probably won't be able to do anything about it. But here, in this world full of water, you little frogs who haven't even removed your tails clean want to deal with me, a snake woman? Isn't that too arrogant? After saying that, Vashti's 6 arms popped out a burst of brilliance at the same time, and in the blink of an eye, her 6 arms were full of weapons. The top pair of arms each held a magic wand. A longbow engraved with countless complex magic patterns appeared in the middle hand on her left. The bottom pair of arms took out a pair of daggers with a typical night elf style. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was almost armed to the teeth. With a flash, Vashti, who should have been on the weaker side, took the initiative to attack. Asterisk swoosh swoosh swoosh. Whoosh. Asterisk there were clearly 7 arrows in a row, but the first 3 arrows were fierce and incomparably violent, and the intense lightning dazzled the twin emperors so much that they could not open their eyes. However, it was the last 4 arrows that truly caused them to lose their lives. Each arrow was like a shadow brought out by the first 3 arrows, silently making a strange arc and sinking into the water in front of Vashti, not even stirring up a splash. In the end, they shot out of the water behind Emperor Vec-Lor in an incomparably abrupt manner, fiercely shooting towards Emperor Vec-Lor's waist. Everything was perfect, but unfortunately she had chosen the wrong target for her sneak attack. As the demon Emperor Vec-Lor was immune to physical attacks. Asterisk clang 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 clang. Asterisk tisk. Even if it was not a direct feedback, Vashti had already realized that he actually had the trait of physical immunity. This discovery made Vashti rather unhappy. As she launched her attack on the demon emperor, the twin emperor's counterattack came as expected. The demon emperor's gift was a shadow arrow, so thick that it could be used as the mast of a cruiser. The sword emperor's counterattack was a fierce forward slash, and with a forceful stomp of his left foot, his huge body had already crossed a distance of 50 meters. Vec-Lor waved the huge Kyra Emperor sword, and with incredible agility, launched a triple slash. Chapter 1423. Cha-cha-cha. The 3 swords formed a Z shape in the air. In the end, the Sword Emperor's 3 swords had no special technique to speak of. It was like a slash from any skilled swordsman. If there was anything special about it, it was fast. Too fast for the eyes to follow. Insanely fast. It was completely unexpected that such a huge body had agility that surpassed most hero-level thieves. If one could not dodge in time, then Vashti would likely turn into snake pieces on the spot and be used to make snake soup. If it was a demigod, they would have already been hit. It must be known that if the twin emperors abandoned their integrity and focused on fighting 2 against 1, it would be very shameless. One was immune to magic, the other was immune to physical, and they could both use heal brothers. Regardless of whether they could defeat them or not, just resisting them was already very difficult. Because in a small area, the 2 brothers could completely cover for each other and use their own characteristics to forcefully take the opponent's moves. It was like a magic attack and the Sword Emperor took it head-on. What would you do? Although their lives were connected, you had to first attack with the right posture, method. This required their enemy to be more versatile. It just so happened that Vashti was such a demigod who practiced both magic and martial arts. In the face of 3 consecutive slashes, Waski did not even think. She twisted her true water snake waist. Her arms were either raised or retracted, turning her body and limbs into a beautiful S shape. The Karaji Emperor sword flashed in front of her and beside her with a cold glint. The timing was so ingenious that it did not seem like a life-and-death battle, but more like a master and disciple feeding each other moves. The moment she avoided the great sword, Vashti's counterattack came. The gorgeous longbow was raised almost at 0 distance. The middle right hand pulled the string and 3 arrows were about to be shot. Under normal circumstances, Vecnala should have pressed forward and attacked before Vashti pulled the bow. Unfortunately, Vashti did not only have a pair of hands. The arm holding the dagger through the thief's skill, fan of knives, at Vecnala's. Not 2. Instead, it was dozens of epic daggers that formed a perfect arc in the air. They pierced through the air like the howl of death as they pierced toward Vecnas. Even if it was an AoE attack, the attack power would not be too high. All Vashti wanted was a split second of separation. Vecnalus couldn't hide even if he wanted to. After all, how could it be that easy to dodge a demigod powerhouse's attack? The Sword Emperor frowned and could only take a step back to avoid the fan of sabers, allowing the terrifying power of the blades to pass right in front of him. The moment he stopped, Vashj had already finished drawing her bow. 3 sharp arrows were shot out from a place not much further than 0 distance. The Sword Emperor was indeed the Sword Emperor. The Kila Emperor's sword slanted, and the 2 lightning bolts were knocked away. Because the Sword Emperor was immune to magic, the lightning was unable to harm the Sword Emperor at all. He tilted his head and dodged the 3rd arrow. The Sword Emperor had thought that this was the full extent of the attack, but that was not the case. Before he realized it, the Demon King Veclor had already unknowingly appeared behind him. Vashj, the Sword Emperor, and the Demon Emperor happened to form a line. The lightning bolts that should have been shot away actually drew a small arc in the air and shot towards the Demon Emperor's face. This time the twin emperors were finally shocked. They completely did not expect that the arrows that seemed to be shot away could still attack a second time, especially when the lightning contained in the arrows completely surpassed the Demon Emperor's natural resistance. If this kind of demigod-level attack really hit, the Demon Emperor would definitely be heavily injured. Veclor had no choice but to stop his next magic attack and use his staff to summon an even more powerful magic shield to block in front of his face. But Vashj's continuous attack was not over yet. No one noticed that her long snake tail had actually grown longer without a sound. Just as the Demon Emperor blocked that arrow, the snake tail was like a noose, accurately and ruthlessly wrapping around the Demon Emperor's right foot. With a twist of the snake's waist, the Demon Emperor's huge body flew out and was forcibly smashed into the deep pool beside the throne. It was true that Veclor was immune to physical attacks, and this kind of attack would not hurt him, but this did not mean that he would not be sent flying. It was only at this moment that Vashj's opponent's wand-wielding arm released a powerful magic, defeating the shadow arrow, that had been released by the Demon Emperor but had lost its master's control. Vashj had won the first round. In Karazhan, the women around Duque gasped when they saw this scene. Vashj, so strong. Jaina's face was ashen, but she had to admit this fact. If she and Vashj were to fight one-on-one, she probably would not even be able to last half a round. This was not just a difference in rank but also a difference in combat experience and fighting style. Vashj had not yet released any big moves, and just by relying on the perfect magic and martial attack combination, she had beaten the demigod duo of the twin emperors into quite a bit of a disadvantage. Duque smiled bitterly. This multi-attack thing is really a talent. If multicast could be barely achieved with hard work, then multi-attack, which could face multiple opponents of the same level without fear, was really impossible to train. Duque suddenly felt a little fervent in his heart. If Vashj is really Selena and is willing to follow me and I can deal with Jaina, then isn't that... Now Duque did not have too much time to let his imagination run wild. After all, he and Selena were not like Tyrant who had hooked up long ago. Even if they were fated, it was an ill-fated relationship from 10,000 years ago. Before continuing this relationship, it was better to do things according to the standards of both sides. In the magic mirror, the second round had already begun. The Demon Emperor, who had been thrown far away, was just about to climb out of the water when he encountered a few unexpected small troubles. Originally, Vashj would summon a few swamp striders on the throne platform. These things had bodies that looked extremely like jellyfish, with flying saucer-shaped bodies and long legs like long tentacles. Unexpectedly, because no one attacked the other few core areas of the Kolaifang Reservoir, Vashj caught the leaders of the few core areas of the reservoir as able-bodied men. The Black Strider was a leader of the Striders with strange abilities. It used its superpower to directly lift the Demon Emperor Veclor who had jumped out of the water. This levitation was very similar to the priest's levitation, but it had characteristics that transcended magic. Veclor could cast spells and attack, but he could not control his body to float high off the ground, to a height of more than 200 meters, and almost hit the ceiling of the Serpentine Cavern. Chapter 1424. The lightning arrows of the Black Strider and the various spells of the Nephilim Emperor clashed in the air like a fireworks battle. Neither side caused any damage to the other, but bought time for Vashj. On the other side, Vashj was actually suppressing the Sword Emperor. It had to be said that having more arms was a bunker. As soon as she saw the Demon Emperor being forced away, Vashj quickly replaced the weapons in her arms with 2 long swords, and directly pressed forward to force the Sword Emperor into close combat. If it was an ordinary battle, the Sword Emperor dared to say that he wouldn't lose to any opponent of the same level. The point was that Vashj's multiple attacks were too disgusting. 6 arms and a long tail that appeared and disappeared mysteriously was fine, but even her hair was an incomparably sharp weapon. 70 or 80 snake hairs meant 70 or 80 deadly venomous snakes. If it was just a simple venomous snake, the Sword Emperor wouldn't be afraid at all, because he was no longer an ordinary creature, but an elemental creature through and through. As it happened, these venomous snakes had been adjusted by Vashj. Even if it was a legendary hero-level warrior, if his equipment wasn't up to standard, he would probably fall on the spot. There were so many venomous snakes, and each of them simply arched their body before suddenly shooting out to bite the Sword Emperor. Because the movements of the snakes were really too fast, they actually created a shadow similar to a machine gun firing. What kind of fighting style was this? The Sword Emperor used a greatsword and couldn't display this kind of fast and fierce attack at close range. In just less than a second of fierce attack, the Twin Emperor's HP dropped by a full tenth. Admittedly, they were now elemental creatures, and as long as the weave had enough elemental magic supply, they wouldn't die. Of course, they could use the method of exchanging blows and wasting HP to win against Vashj. But if they had a choice, they definitely wouldn't use this method. If they couldn't defeat Vashj within her original HP, and in a situation where it was 2 against 1, that would be their failure. The pride in their hearts wouldn't allow them to fight this kind of ugly victory. In addition, they sensitively discovered that Duque didn't seem to want to kill Vashj, which further stimulated their nerves. This was their first battle after pledging allegiance to Duque. If they couldn't win beautifully, even if it wasn't Vashj, other demigods would join in the future. Then where would they stand? The twin emperors were telepathic. At the same time, the two emperors launched their attacks. The Nephilim king raised his hand, and a fire elemental that looked like Ragnaros appeared out of thin air in front of him. However, it didn't have a fire demon hammer. Instead, it had 2 blazing claws, each of which was the size of a round table. The fire elemental giant slammed its claws on the ground. A circle of flames spread out from the center of the fire elemental palm. The originally incomparably damp Colaifong throne was suddenly surrounded by a cloud of blazing steam. Under the high temperature and heat, water vapor appeared in the blink of an eye. Soon after, the entire platform turned into a world of flames that burned with specks of red sparks. At this moment, the fire elemental was not just on fire. The 5-story-tall Black Strider was already huge enough, but now the fire elemental's body was rapidly expanding. It was almost 4 times the size of the Black Strider. Its huge body almost filled the entire Colaifong throne. As it launched its attack, the flames on both sides of its body even scorched the ceiling above the throne and the easternmost wall. The Black Strider, which was originally considered a mini-boss, let out a terrible cry under its barbaric charge. It then turned into charcoal and was finally swallowed by the flames. It was as if it was the fuel that made this blazing world of flames even more violent. Oh! Vashj was not surprised or angry. Instead, she laughed coldly. In this underwater space that was filled with water in all directions, the other party actually dared to play with fire with her? Was it tired of living? Or was it courting death? Without any hesitation, the huge wall behind Vashj's throne suddenly let out a loud kacha sound. Then the entire wall shattered with a loud bang. In the huge hole that was the size of a football field, thousands of tons of seawater gushed in every second. The fire elemental world just now was naturally destroyed by the even more terrifying nature. Gurgle. Gurgle. The fire elemental giant that was still baring its fangs and brandishing its claws just a moment ago, when it opened its mouth and actually spouted out bubbles, everything was over. In the water level that was rapidly rising visible to the naked eye, in the water world that was almost filled with raging waves, Vashj swayed her long dark green snake tail. The bow and arrow in her hand had already been replaced by a glittering golden trident. I originally didn't want to use this move to bully you so early. Unfortunately, you're too insensible actually using flames in my water world. A clear voice that was like a wind chime was full of demonic teasing. If it was on land, Vashj would have suffered a crushing defeat at any moment. But this was the bottom of the water that was nearly 1,000 meters deep. No matter how powerful the Karaji twin emperors were, even with the support of the magic net, could they still evaporate the Viper Lake that was hundreds of square kilometers in an instant? Then they would not be demigods, but absolute true gods with Draenor's divinity. Unfortunately, in this broken world, where would the true gods come from? Vashj had thought that she would see a look of shock and anger on the faces of the twin emperors. She was disappointed. The Sword Emperor Vecnalas raised his sword. The Demon Emperor Lor stood with his hands behind his back. Their behavior was definitely not normal. Sure enough, in the next second, Vashj suddenly discovered that the water temperature had changed. It was a high-speed drop as if falling off a cliff. At first, it was just ice shards mixed in the water, but in the blink of an eye, everything in sight began to freeze. The pool surrounding the high platform of the throne, the elite subordinates led by the Black Strider, the hard high platform. Then the rising water level caused the surrounding ice walls to become taller and taller, pointing straight at the dome of the Viper Shrine that was more than 200 meters high. The Twin Emperor's goal was actually to freeze the entire Viper Shrine? This time it was Vasht's turn to be shocked. Magic and martial arts dual cultivation? Sounds good. The Sword Emperor sneered. It's just that no matter which one, you're not at the peak. The Demon Emperor also sneered. You can suppress me in close combat. Your natural magic attainments are also above mine. But, although you're a water master on the surface, your true strength is only in nature, not ice. The Demon Emperor hit the nail on the head. Vasht's expression finally changed. It was true that she was an intellectual hero, but she also had extraordinary magic attainments. Unfortunately, that was only in nature, which was mainly thunder. She was not a mage in the traditional sense. Perhaps she could suppress the Demon Emperor in nature, but when it came to water, she was not as good as Vec Lore. The Demon Emperor had dug a big hole for her to jump into. Chapter 1425. In the world of Warcraft, perhaps a patch made a god. Among so many professions, mages had always had the reputation of smashing their own children. What? It was because of the infinite possibilities of shaping magic, which gave mages a lot of control and field control skills. No matter what kind of harsh situation it was, Pharaoh could always find the corresponding magic to deal with the enemy. Now Vasht was in a situation where she was at a disadvantage because her magic was too singular. In terms of one-on-one battles, since 10,000 years ago, Vasht, who had become a Naga, had always been in intrigue or various battles. It was impossible to know when she began to abandon Queen Azhara to go solo. It could only be inferred from the results that the blood and sweat that Vasht had paid to become the Naga whose power was second only to Queen Azhara's was absolutely unimaginable. That was not choosing a genius among a group of mentally retarded people, but a bloody path through a large group of insidious and cunning compatriots with powerful spellcasting abilities. Therefore, whether it was combat level or experience, Vasht was definitely above any of the Twin Emperors. After all, for more than 20,000 years, the Karaji insect people had basically been in a sealed state, or the War of the Shifting Sands had only let them show their heads, and they were sealed again. The pampered Twin Emperors were really not Vasht's opponent when they were separated. With the two brothers added together, it was a completely different matter. With the Sword Emperor's cover, the Demon Emperor could cast spells safely. Looking at the ice around her, Vasht immediately realized that her situation was not good. The Logia's thunder element was much thinner. It was easy to explain from a scientific point of view. Any water with impurities was a good conductor because there were a large number of freely moving trace ions in the water. It was these ions of a certain concentration that under a certain voltage, usually very small, the positive and negative ions in the water would move in a certain direction, so the electric current would be generated. When the voltage was not high or normal, if there were no other impurities in the ice or it had not been polluted, generally speaking, it could be understood that ice did not conduct electricity. But if the ice had been polluted or encountered a very strong high voltage, it could still conduct electricity. The insulator that people usually talked about was relative. Even insulating plastic, when it encountered an extremely high voltage, would still conduct electricity. Now Vasht was in such a situation. If she forced herself to use thunder, it was not impossible, but the power would drop a lot, and the consumption of magic power would increase exponentially. However, she had no other choice. If she allowed the Demon Emperor to continue freezing the entire Serpent Temple, no, even just the coiled Fang throne, then her doomsday would come. Ice was solid. With such an abundant water source, the Demon King could freely use ice to restrict her movement space. For Vasht, who relied on agility and intelligence, this was another form of suppression. That would drive her to death. Suddenly, Vasht raised her 6 arms high, all 6 palms facing upwards at the same time. In the thick and solid layer of ice that was like glass, the dazzling lightning that came from afar was refracted. After a full second, a series of continuous muffled thunder came faintly from the distance. Cracking sounds came from the huge layer of ice. Without a doubt, the layer of ice created by the Nephilim Emperor's surging mana was shattering like glass, and then collapsing from the outside. The sound was so loud that the people in Karazhan, who were watching the scene through the magic mirror, could not help but be speechless. At the scene, the sound of the layer of ice peeling off was almost deafening. In their field of vision, Incomparably dazzling bolts of lightning were like invisible giant warhammers, fiercely smashing onto the surface of the ice. Crash. The sound of glass shattering was quickly swallowed up by the surging lake water. Mixed with ice shards, the lake water rushed towards the throne platform with an unstoppable momentum. Veclor's brows were tightly knitted together. He put his hands together, and the surrounding space suddenly burst with a bright brilliance. That was the expansion of the frost elemental domain again, with the last step below the platform as the boundary, attempting to use a smaller range but higher concentration of frost elemental domain to separate the fighting platform and the serpent temple into different elemental worlds. It won't be that easy. Vashj endured the Sword Emperor's sword slash on her tail, sent the Sword Emperor flying, and fiercely pounced towards the Demon Emperor. She did not know that the two brothers had the ultimate skill, Gemini teleportation. With a flash she would have to face the Sword Emperor's obstruction again. Unknowingly she and the Twin Emperors had entered a stalemate. She knew very well that if this continued she would be the one to lose. Vashj could not help but let out a scream. This howl traveled far and wide. At this moment, in the ruins of the Twin Tower stronghold, the allies who were fighting fiercely suddenly discovered that the enemy's offensive had suddenly become fiercer. Countless Naga seemed to have entered a berserk state, madly attacking. What's wrong with these guys all of a sudden? Brawl Bearskin, who had turned into a war bear, slapped a male Naga down with a bare paw on the wall of the stronghold. The guy's stomach was broken and his intestines were all over the ground, but he still propped himself up like crazy, continuing to climb up from the corpses of his compatriots and killing his way into the stronghold. That's right, outside the temporarily built stronghold, there was already a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Countless Murlocs' corpses were piled on the beach by the water, all the way to the edge of the nearly 10-meter-high wall. Even with this slope, the Naga's side still could not directly attack, because the entire mountain of corpses was surrounded by the flames created by the flamethrowers. Before the flammable liquid burned out, don't expect this volcano to be extinguished. Generally speaking, this was true. But above the regular combat power, there were still hero-level powerhouses and leader-level monsters. The powerful combat power that Vashj had sent away were actually all on the Twin Tower stronghold. Yusler, a huge strange fish with a face similar to that of a male Naga, was the hidden boss of the Serpent Shrine Cavern. It itself was not too strong, but its water arrow and fountain special skills had become the magic weapons to suppress the Alliance's flamethrowers. Under its powerful spray of water, the flames that obviously would not be extinguished by water were washed away by the powerful flow of water along with the oil. Although it could not leave the deep water area with its strong support, the Serpent Shrine Cavern as well as several area bosses under Vashj's command were able to kill their way over and attack the stronghold's defensive line. The Slave Pen, the Steam Cellar, and the Dark Swamp, the small bosses of these three areas, under the leadership of several powerhouses of the Serpent Shrine Cavern, fought against the heroes of the Alliance and the Horde. Hold on. Sal roared. He had just sent Warlord Calathares flying with a hammer, and was almost tricked by the Water Master Surthbaya. Chapter 1426. 15 years after the Dark Portal, Illidan lost to Arthas in Northrend and was forced to retreat to Draenor in the Outland. Illidan had been painstakingly managing his territory in the Outland. In 8 years, Vashj had firmly controlled Zangarmarsh. There was a saying that whoever controlled the water source would be invincible in the impasse. Vashj used the black technology from Draenei to create a large number of water pumps to extract water from the entire Outland. She also gathered a large number of elite water warriors. In the beginning, there were some tribal powerhouses who felt that gathering all the powerhouses of the Alliance and the tribes in the Outland to defend to the death was making a mountain out of a molehill. When all the powerhouses under Vashj came out, the Alliance army realized that they were lucky to be able to take advantage of the opponent's contempt and build a small fortress on the shore early. Apart from giant monsters like Yusler that could only stay in the deep water, there were also the three-headed snake Garzian from the Dark Swamp, the swamp giant Hogrifin, the mechanic Stylig, and so on. The biggest characteristic of these guys was their huge bodies. If any one of them were to fight with the heroes of the Alliance army, as long as the heroes were given enough time, they would definitely be exhausted to death. That was the problem, they appeared together. Just like a tank charge, if a tank came alone, everyone had 100 ways to deal with it. The easiest way was to go around and launch a fatal attack at the blind spot of the opponent's line of sight. A tank charge was really unstoppable and there was no way to escape. Without this fortress to rely on, the Alliance army was very likely to be defeated by the terrifying attack of a group of giant monster leaders. Then they would be chased all over the swamp and killed one by one like ducks being chased. However, with an extremely strong city wall, it was another matter. At first, the engineers didn't understand why they had to add a large number of triangular steel brackets behind the temporary city wall as auxiliary support. When the Naga ordered the Murlocs to fill the slope with corpses and pave the passage, everyone understood. Never underestimate the enemy's strength and madness. After the first layer of the city wall was breached, the almost completely sealed arrow tower that was specially not connected to the entrance of the city wall was still pouring spears and cannons out. The special design of the fortress could withstand the bombardment of cannons and heavy weapons very well. It could even allow the cannons in the second layer of the defense tower to directly bombard it without any hesitation. Anyway, the ones who died would definitely be the enemies. The empty space between the first and second layer of the fortress walls had turned into a horrifying slaughterhouse. Vash's subordinates wouldn't have thought that after the Alliance reached the city wall, they would still have the time to use excavators to perform Azure Flight's ultimate skill. In such a short period of time, they dug 36 large holes with a depth of more than 20 meters around the inner city wall, waiting for the giant monsters on Vash's side to fall in. It was filled with abandoned steel bars that looked like barbs. Most of these were leftover bits and pieces from the construction of strongholds and other projects. Now they were perfectly used as traps. For example, the swamp giant Agalfin had just stepped over the Murloc's corpses and rushed over the city wall when he fell into the pit. Between each pit was a 2-meter-wide path for the allied army to retreat. This width was enough for the Tauren, but for the swamp giant boss whose foot was more than 2 meters in diameter, it was worse than walking on a tightrope. Hagerfin fell to the ground in a sorry state, and was impaled by dozens of protruding steel bars. Roar! The giant, who was more than 5 stories tall, let out a mournful howl. Even though it was very painful, it wasn't a fatal injury for a swamp giant with strong vitality. At this moment, William leaped up high and raised his 2 increasingly famous artifact swords, Sharatol, Shadow Ripper, and Aramine, Shadow Plunderer. The 2 swords stabbed at Agalfin's throat at the same time. One red and one blue, 2 bright rays of light extended from the arc-shaped swords in his hands. In an instant, the swamp giant's throat was completely penetrated, and it went straight through to its brain. The swamp giant wasn't a low-intelligence creature like the slime monsters. With its brain destroyed, it couldn't have been more dead on the spot. Not every hero had William's attack power. Without 2 artifact longswords to pave the way, it was hard to say who would be the one getting killed instead. On the other side, Fandral Staghelm was very unlucky to encounter the 3-headed snake, Garzian. This super monster, whose lower body was like a lizard, swept its huge tail, and it smashed into Fandral like a battering ram. The violent impact sent him flying like a flying ball, and he crashed into the outer steel wall of the fortress. If he hadn't been able to transform back into his human form from his giant bear form, he would have been slapped into the wall so hard that he wouldn't even be able to dig him out. While Fandral was attracting Garzian's attention, Lilith's Windrunner struck a pose that looked like a golden rooster standing on one leg. She pulled the bowstring tightly with both hands and used her long legs, which were second only to her sister's, to pull out a 2-meter-long bow that looked like an English longbow. Naturally, she wouldn't use ordinary arrows to pull out such a long bow. Those were the crossbow bolts that had almost been eliminated by time. Everyone realized that it was true that high-explosive bullets were used to attack small monsters. Armor-piercing bullets were fine against ordinary elite monsters, but the leaders that came out of the Kolaifang Reservoir all had a layer of water elemental armor, and the power of explosive weapons was greatly reduced. Compared to the overwhelming firepower of the flying battleships above their heads, the more primitive attacks of sharp weapons were more effective against these thick-skinned monsters. This time, Lilith directly shot an arrow and nailed one of Garzian's 3 heads to the base of a half-collapsed arrow tower. Roar! The 3-headed snake leader wasn't afraid of injury, but it was afraid of this kind of attack that limited its movements. Without the 3 heads to attack from multiple angles at the same time, its attack success rate would be further reduced due to its slow movements. It let out a mournful howl, and a thick sour smell flowed out of its mouth as it opened and closed. Mortals would feel dizzy just by smelling it. Any kind of giant monster would be terrifying when it went crazy. When it rushed into the fortress earlier because of its large size and slow crawl, it had already suffered several rounds of full-force bombardment from cannon fodder, and was already seriously injured. Although Garzian, as a boss, was not a big deal in the entire Outland, this monster's dying blow was still quite terrifying. The other two heads that weren't nailed faced the sky at the same time, and the terrifying acid spray swept an almost 180-degree arc in the air. This spray covered almost half the low altitude of the battlefield. Chapter 1427. There was no way to block this kind of strong acid attack. Several flying frigates that had lowered their altitude in order to protect the stronghold were hit with bad luck. One of them was directly hit by the acid. Under the attack of the acid, the magic shield, which was not very strong to begin with, only resisted for less than a second before it burst into a dazzling blue light and shattered. The strong acid that could easily dissolve steel hit the side of the ship. At first, the frigate that was more than 40 meters long could barely maintain its shape. A few seconds later, like ice cream placed on a high-temperature oven, more than 100 people on the ship, along with the hull, turned into green slime and disintegrated in the air. After falling to the ground, it even dissolved pieces of the ground, making a terrible sizzling sound. The other frigates that were hit weren't much better off. It was inevitable that the magic shield would explode. Most of them were completely destroyed by a few cabins. The only good thing was that the corrosiveness of Garzian's acid was limited, and it would stop after corroding a few meters. Garzian twisted his remaining two heads frantically, trying to bite all the enemies in his attack range. This was the last of its madness. In the sky, a wyvern flew over Garzian's head. The one riding the dragon was the former chief of the Dragon Maw clan, Zulud. Now, it seemed he was also a Death Knight. Technically speaking, he was actually a forgotten warrior. Because his fighting style in life was to ride a dragon, he could only become a mediocre dragon knight after death. The Dragon Sleep Temple refused to recognize the wyvern subspecies as a dragon. Ready. Jump. Just as Zulud finished shouting, Orgrim, who had been sitting on the back of the dragon, immediately jumped down, performing a heavenly justice. It couldn't be helped. Grom Hellscream had already retired. Although the Horde had many heroes, it was an indisputable fact that they lacked a raider. Originally, Sal had the talent, but he was the chief. Only Orgrim would be able to do it. The snake-like long neck kept twisting. Garzian, whose head had been nailed to death, didn't notice the threat falling from the sky at all. The first to jump down was Orgrim. He did a forward somersault in the air and perfectly concentrated all the impact force into the hammerhead. This, Thorny Branch Warhammer, was a good item from the Ankh-Karaj Holy Temple. It had a standard hexagonal hammerhead and it felt more like the Hammer of Destruction that he was used to. Although he had the Frosted Warhammer that Ajrian had dropped, the quality of the Ankh-Karaj Shrine was already slightly higher than the Ankh-Karaj Ruins. Also, the Frosted Warhammer was a one-handed hammer while this one was a two-handed one. Could the power compare? The second to jump down was Zulud. He was holding an Anubisath Warhammer, which was more suitable for him since he often needed to ride a mount. The two Horde heroes landed one after the other. Because the height of the target's head was different, they hit the target perfectly at the same time. Because they were too synchronized, it sounded like a boom. Accompanied by a loud bang, two snake heads exploded in an instant. The hammer that fell from the sky directly blew up the remaining two heads of Garzian. This meant that another vanguard monster from the Naga's side had fallen. Without the interference of these impact-type monsters, Pharaoh, who was more suitable as a cannon like an Astrian, was much more at ease. Without Jaina and Duque, he would be the undisputed #1 mage in the Alliance. The largest magic amplification tower in the fortress naturally belonged to him. A series of incantations sounded, and the entire magic tower shone with a strange light. The elf-style arc-pattern magic arrays on it became brighter one by one. At the highest level, a magic array expanded beyond the area of the tower itself and spread into the void. Then, as this magic array expanded, 3 smaller magic arrays formed a triangle and expanded one by one beside this magic array. Then 12 huge fireballs appeared in the air one by one. These 12 fireballs formed a standard circle outside the magic tower, like the 12 o'clock positions on a clock. Then there was a continuous frenzied attack as if it was the wrath of heaven. Every second, hundreds of fireballs the size of millstones split from the 12 huge fireballs and exploded toward the Naga troops who were attacking the fortress. Unlike the crude and biased bombardment of the flying fleet, the Sun King's fireballs were more accurate. Like a sniper rifle, they accurately smashed into the head of every Naga. The performance of the heroes on the Alliance's side was so outstanding that those who were not sober might really think that the Alliance had the upper hand. That was wrong. The ruins of the Twin Towers were located in the center of the swamp. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the hinterland of Vashth's lair. The Alliance played airborne and defensive attacks. It would be great if they could invest 2,000 troops at most. However, Vasht could easily catch tens of thousands of Murlocs here as cannon fodder, and over 10,000 Naga could drown this small fortress. What's more, this time the Naga's flying snake army no longer held back. The overwhelming flying snakes could be said to be a comprehensive three-dimensional attack. The unique bang-bang sound of the 40mm octuple bang cannon had not stopped since the beginning of the battle. Even though they knew that the continuous firing would easily break, no one dared to stop. There were too many flying snakes. It was different from the single charge from west to east. Under the command of the leader, some of them climbed to a height of 500 meters outside the range of the anti-aircraft cannons and then dived down. Some used the clouds as cover and moved in a snake shape to attack. Some used the huge mushrooms unique to the swamp as cover and took a detour to attack. The problem was that the range of the Bang Bang cannon in the early days of the Alliance was too short. It only had an effective range of 500 meters. Not only was it slightly shorter than the original 700 meters range, but it was also particularly harmful to the barrel. The original version was a 2-pound cannon and had a special mechanical design that was especially suitable for long-term automatic firing. This counterfeit version was actually a large-caliber shotgun. It was not the same thing at all. Relying on human hands to shake often meant that the mechanical precision and automation were seriously insufficient. Some of the Bang Bang cannons would explode on their own without the enemy attacking them after firing for a long time. Of course, the dwarves were also ruthless people. They knew that it was very likely that they would explode. The dwarf gunners sitting on the gun seats in the middle of the 4 barrels on the left and right wore 2 sets of armor and continued to fire. A set of leather armor inside and a set of plate armor outside. As for what would happen when the barrel exploded, it would depend on luck. Even though the anti-aircraft cannons were firing so desperately, many airships were still hit by the high-density attack of the flying snakes. At this moment, a destroyer had a gap in the tight air defense net because 2 anti-aircraft cannons had accidentally exploded. The flying snakes swarmed forward. Even in just 5 seconds, the other cannons had already filled the gap. But it was too late. Chapter 1428. The unusually nimble flying snakes had already rushed to the deck. The flying snakes, who had already received the order, retracted their long wings and began to destroy the destroyer's propellers without a care. Unlike the thick deck, the propellers were still a fragile existence even with protective grills. A flying snake that had already been hit by multiple cannons chose to perish together with the enemy. Its entire body crashed into the propellers and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. However, the snake's unique toughness also wrapped around the propellers, and the high-speed rotation of the propellers stopped. In the blink of an eye, the entire destroyer lost its balance and kept tumbling, falling from mid-air into the distant hills. Most of the soldiers who were flung out of the destroyer did not meet the happy end of falling to their deaths. Before they could fall to the ground, they had already been intercepted and killed by the flying snakes in mid-air. Under the sharp mouths of the snakes, only broken limbs and flesh could fall to the ground. On the other side, after a few seconds, a bright ball of fire rose in the direction where the spaceship had fallen. Shrink the formation. Bulang nervously commanded on the Black Pearl. He had to constantly adjust the position of each battleship on the 3D map according to the situation of the battleships. The situation was still not optimistic. In the sky were countless flying snakes, and on the ground was a surging sea race army. The entire Twin Tower stronghold was like a small boat in a tsunami, about to capsize and sink at any time. Bulang cast his gaze to the east. At the far end of the horizon was the Dark Portal, which was also the only way for the expeditionary army to return home. Duque, you have to make a decision. In Karazhan, Duque looked at the battle situation in the magic mirror and suddenly sighed. The twin emperors were indeed suppressing Vasky. In the elemental domain they had the advantage. What was worse was that this was not an overwhelming advantage. The demon emperor desperately urged the ice elements to freeze the surroundings, preventing the land battle from turning into an underwater battle. Vasht continued to wreak havoc, using lightning strikes or summoning large underlings to break the ice wall with brute force. In close combat, the Sword Emperor had no choice but to maintain his distance from Vasht. Once the distance was too close, the Sword Emperor would be beaten up by Vasht's high agility and speed. Alas! Following Duque's sigh, the battle on Serpentine Temple's throne platform came to an abrupt end, because a variable had appeared. Sigh. Vasht also sighed inwardly. This kind of opportunity to train with a suitable opponent was too rare. In this life, perhaps because someone had returned to the ancient war to stir up trouble, the trajectory of Vasht's life had changed subtly. First, before joining Illidan, he would follow Archimonde. Of course, in the eyes of the arrogant Arkharans, the Naga clan was just like a barge or a ferry. Archimonde, who had destroyed thousands of planets, simply looked down on Vasht. Not only did he work for free by following that damn Ak, he even reaped a lot of benefits. After all, he had lost a large number of his men when he landed in Azhara. Then, when Nazul raised the flag of rebellion against the Burning Legion, Vasht, who had already barely joined the Legion as a vassal, was directly sent by Kill Jaden to follow Illidan. Then came another defeat. Illidan was outshot by Arthas in 20 shots. Vasht had no choice but to follow Illidan to the Outland dejectedly. But in this life, Duque gave Kale, that's a hand. Instead of being corrupted, he became the savior of the Draenei. As a result, among Illidan's direct subordinates, Vasht could be considered to be the most powerful. Almost all the spoils of war in the siege would be given to her. Coincidentally, Vasht actually leveled up. Although she was only a demigod who strengthened her body and broke through her limits. After suffering for 10,000 years, she finally found a path of power, so Vasht naturally cherished it. Soon she could not see the path ahead. On the path of leveling up, Illidan would not help her at all. In the past few years she had been one-sidedly beating the Draenei and could not find an opponent of the same level. Even if she imitated him, she could not find an opponent. Illidan's path of dark energy was not something she could learn. Dark energy was refined by harvesting lives and souls. Everyone was harvesting. Illidan, the boss, ate the meat and she, Vasht, could only drink the soup. The more powerful the power, the less it would be her turn. She could not improve herself by simply plundering, so what else could she do? On the path of power she was completely lost. Now it was different. The Kiraj twin emperors were her best touchstone. She could vaguely see another path in the other party. This path had absolutely nothing to do with their previous master, Si Thun. During the fight, she could only feel that she had to cooperate with something and form a resonance with it. Only by absorbing that thing could she make a stronger power take root in her body. It was a very mysterious feeling. Originally, Vasht wanted to experience more in the battle. Unfortunately, at this moment, the twin emperors suddenly retreated and stopped without warning. Vasht had to interrupt her journey of enlightenment and focus on dealing with the upcoming battle that could start again at any time. The twin emperors stood with their hands by their sides. Vasht looked up at them, knowing that this pair of brother emperors represented the will of the weave demigod Duke Marcus, and that demigod had obviously been watching everything that was happening here from somewhere. They stopped and did not speak, which meant the main character had appeared. Sure enough, after a moment, the illusory elemental radiance extended out from the weave. When the bright light condensed together and formed a human figure in mid-air, a calm voice descended on the high platform of the Kolaifang throne. Vasht suddenly had a sense of trance. She seemed to have heard the voice that lingered in the minds of every ancient Naga like a ghost. It was a terrifying voice that was absolutely unforgettable, a voice that ended the dream of the High Elves' power, and even dealt a heavy blow to the invincible god Sargeras in their hearts. "Have we met before?" It was a very comical and funny sentence. If it had been before someone transmigrated, this would have been a terrible pickup line. But Vasht did not underestimate this sentence or the person who said it. Looking at Mark Dooku's face, she put away the weapons in each of her hands into her storage space bag. Her 6 hands crossed at the same time and she bowed deeply. No Naga who has experienced the ancient war will forget your face, your voice, and your power waves. The great demon Terminator, the destroyer of the void, the former high-level void lord of the infernal realm. Lord Mark Dooku. Suddenly being flattered, Duque was a little embarrassed, but he still asked directly, "Do you know a maid called Serenia Eubateria?" Chapter 1429. Duque had never imagined that he could see such a wonderful and complicated expression on the face of a female antagonist. At first, it might have been a pleasant surprise. He could clearly see Vasht's pupils contract instantly, and the sound of her inhaling could be clearly heard from 10 meters away. But it was followed by trembling. Duque's system elf prompted that the surface temperature of Vasht's skin was rising, and Duque saw that she was clenching her teeth. This could not be a good thing. If things continued like this, there would probably be no other ending than hacking Vasht to death. In the next moment, Vasht's entire body relaxed, and her excited eyes returned to calm in an extremely short time. Her gaze became unfocused and filled with a sense of distance. Her unfocused pupils seemed to have traversed through time and space, seeing the past, seeing the glory of the High Elves 10,000 years ago. But in the end she laughed. Ha ha ha. Clear and seductive laughter echoed throughout the entire Kolaifeng throne, and even a small half of the Serpentine Temple. She actually, in a short 2 or 3 seconds, she acted out all sorts of emotions. Duque tilted his head and did not speak. His face showed an expression that said, "What are you laughing at?" Vash's 6 arms hung down, and her expression and posture were all sorts of unnatural. It was a feeling that made her feel at a loss. Do you know? In the past 10,000 years, I have imagined what it would be like to reunite with you countless times. My dear master. Mark Dooku no Duke Marcus. As soon as she said this, everyone was shocked. First, the twin emperors' expressions turned cold, and then became very strange. Did Vash just call Marcus master? Then what the hell were we fighting so hard for just now? Then it was in Karazhan. At this moment all the queens, high priestesses and female generals of the Azeroth continent were there. Like Elucia, Servanas, Kalia and the like, they were purely onlookers. Aurelia, on the other hand, facepalmed. Duque, from calm to astonishment and then to a high-pitched voice, Jaina was excited, just as Duque had expected. Vash was the enemy who killed Jimmy's brother. She had suddenly become Duque's subordinate, and it seemed that their relationship was not shallow. What the hell was this? The next second, Gianna found herself suddenly being hugged. That feeling that was as gentle as water, that power that soothed the soul, in the entire Imperial harem, only one person had this kind of power. Tyrant? Calm down, Gianna, I know who she is. Believe me, Duque has never touched her. That was a very faint but inconceivable fate between master and servant. Tyrant spoke 4 to 5 words in a second, like a machine gun, which immediately calmed Jaina down. If Tyrant had explained slower, there might have been even more misunderstandings. Fortunately, Duque had sought out Tyrant before the crack appeared, just in case. Duque turned back and smiled bitterly at Jaina. 10,000 years is too long. I wasn't even sure of Tyrant's feelings at that time, let alone taking care of a mere servant in name. Is that so? Jaina's voice was almost a whisper. Don't worry, I will not forget your second brother's death. Even if she is really my servant, I will give you a satisfactory explanation. Duque walked over and hugged Jaina lightly. He slowly stroked her back, and could clearly feel that her body had calmed down. His divine telekinesis once again appeared on Mark Dooku's face. The situation was just as interesting. Wearing Mark Dooku's outer shell, Duque sighed. It really is you, Salagia. I really didn't know that you were Vash. I should have thought that Queen Azhara had thousands of servants. What a coincidence. There are many unexpected things. I never thought that the god's emissary sent by the great Sargeras, who was worshipped by the entire High Elves, would be the greatest traitor in the history of the Burning Legion. I also never thought that the human hero who destroyed the Twisting Void Fortress and humiliated the army for 10,000 years, Mark Dooku, was actually the Alliance commander Duke Marcus from 10,000 years in the future using Nozdormu's power. Plop, plop, plop. Vash applauded with her middle arm. Wonderful. This is too wonderful. Sure enough, compared to such a great undertaking that will shock the entire universe, the fate of a little maid like me, who was once half-hearted and turned to my new master and secretly stole information from my old master, is certainly not worth mentioning. It was clearly a compliment, but anyone could hear the bitterness in Vash's voice. Vashjai. Duque didn't know what to say. This was an extreme contradiction. Duque was a nostalgic person. Although he didn't have any psychological burden for giving up on Salagia at that time, after all, Salagia had chosen to inform Queen Azhara, he still couldn't bear to see her become like this 10,000 years later. Duque's words were suddenly interrupted by Vash. I'm not Vash. The servant with this title died the moment her master, Queen Azhara, gave her away as a gift. I'm Salagia. Salagia Ubatilia. An elven servant who was punished and exiled because she betrayed her new master. Then, something that no one could have imagined happened. Vash raised her 6 arms at the same time, palms facing the sky, and a green brilliance began to linger around her body. Under everyone's surprised gaze, Vash's body shape rapidly changed. The 2 pairs of arms above and below disappeared, and the snake hair that was dancing in the air was also gone. The long snake tail was shortening at a high speed. When the green brilliance disappeared, what appeared in everyone's eyes was a different kind of night elf. She had a head of red shoulder-length hair and fair skin, completely lacking the pale purple skin of the night elves. Under the chest protector that looked like white wings, there was an X-shaped dress formed by intersecting white ribbons, which just happened to lightly cover the sexy navel. The lower part of her body was similar to a Greek-style floor-length dress that Duque wore before he transmigrated. Even without the high slit on the side, the faintly discernible dress still made her long legs look exquisite and alluring. Vashj slowly walked in front of Mark Dooku, kneeled on the ground and bowed deeply. "Master, you said before, not every existence is qualified to stand by your side. Back then, you had the determination to endure 10,000 years of pain and torture to enter the Burning Legion as a spy. If I also have this courage and perseverance, when we meet again, you will accept me as your handmaiden." Chapter 1430. Vashj continued to speak tirelessly. 10,000 years have passed. Although I used the ultimate transformation that you taught me to deceive my former compatriots, I have indeed suffered unimaginable hardships, and more or less atoned for my sin of betraying you. Now I, Vasilika Ubatilia, once again beg you, great master, to let me return and become your maid. These sincere words moved the women of Karazhan. 10,000 years of suffering. Everyone thought that the High Elves deserved it. They betrayed their compatriots and finally fell into the deep sea because of the judgment of fate. In order to survive, they did not hesitate to sell their souls to Enzos. As a result, their beauty was lost forever, and they became dirty and ugly Naga, wandering in the dark and lightless deep sea, with the most disgusting underwater creatures. However, the ultimate transformation deceived Enzos, and also became the last hope and redemption in Vashj's heart. After 10,000 years, she actually recognized Duque like tyrant. Was this considered as going through thousands of twists and turns, and finally achieving the right result? At the top of Karazhan, the women were silent. It was too cruel to use 10,000 years to test a relationship. It did not matter if it was the relationship between a man and a woman, or the relationship between a master and a servant. No one dared to say that after being separated from each other for more than 3.6 million days and nights, they could still maintain their original hearts. Not to mention staying in such a dark underwater world filled with negative emotions such as resentment and madness. Only Jaina lowered her head slightly. No one knew what kind of complicated emotions she was feeling under her delicate face, which was constantly changing between a gloomy and a wavering expression. On the throne of the Serpent Shrine, Duque also sighed. "Very impressive loyalty. I do not know what this 10,000 years of fate has brought you, nor can I feel the hardships you have experienced. Since it was a promise I made back then, and you have sincerely pledged yourself to me, I can't think of a reason to refuse." After saying that, Duque, who had the appearance of Mark Dooku, gently opened his arms, revealing a faint smile. "Welcome, Vasilika." One sentence determined the whole matter. The twin emperors who stood next to him had a gloomy and unclear light in their yellow eyes. It would be a lie to say that they were not angry. If they could defeat Vashj more cleanly, even if Vashj returned to Duque's embrace, they would still be meritorious. Now that they were neither up nor down, and they still couldn't take down the two of them, the situation had changed. They had become Vashj's touchstone. It was too late to regret now. If they were given another chance, they would choose a more aggressive fighting style. Vashj, who had completely transformed into a night elf, straightened her back, a look of devotion and fanaticism beyond imagination on her face. 10,000 years ago I had a chance for redemption. But I chose to curry favor with my former master, Queen Azhara. It was my stupidity that caused my 10,000 years of suffering. However, whenever I saw the hideous appearance of my compatriots and compared it to my beautiful body after I cancelled the ultimate transformation spell, I always felt comforted. My lord, this is the beacon of hope that keeps me from falling into madness. Vashj knelt down again. This time, she used her trembling hands to gently hold both sides of Duque's right boot. The dignified master of Kolaifong, who controlled the water source of millions of creatures in the Outland, and could even easily change the situation in the entire Outland, Naga Queen Vashj, in the most humble posture in front of Duque, told her loyal prayers. "Praise you, my lord. Praise you, great Master Duke Marcus." After saying that, Vashj kissed Duque's shoe heavily. To be honest, Duque could not get used to this exaggerated salute no matter how many times he did it. Although the Nagas had dispersed and become clan-based, the customs that had been passed down from the High Elf period had not changed at all. Power, status, and class were all very solidified. Seeing Vashj's insistence, Duque also accepted this big salute. The master and servant status was set. Duque said, "The farce outside can end now. Every moment, there are more unnecessary sacrifices happening. Master, if I had stayed in Illidan's camp. Damn, are you addicted to playing infernal affairs like me? He cursed in his heart. On the surface, Duque was the man who claimed to be the Radiant King. Duque's expression became serious. I am a demigod who spies on fate. I am the flag-bearer who overthrew the tyranny of the Burning Legion. Wandering for 10,000 years is enough. A mere Illidan is not worth it for my maid to risk her life again. After the huckster said these words, the fanaticism on Vasht's face became even more intense. Thank you, my lord, for your understanding. However, this relationship from 10,000 years ago should be kept a little secret. Duque's expression was mysterious. Strictly speaking, the name Mark Dooku was not on the Burning Legion's must-kill list. This was because when he had publicly destroyed the Twisted Void Fortress, Duque had used the name Infernal Affairs. Mark Dooku was just a temporary alias Duque used in Azhara. Back then, there were 3 demon leaders in charge of Azhara, Magtheridon and the Eridar Gemini. The Eridar Gemini were already Duque's insiders. Magtheridon had just been killed by Varian, and it would take time for him to resurrect. It would not be a problem for a while. As long as Duque did not jump out and claim that he was the Infernal Affairs, the Burning Legion had no reason to immediately call their main force over. In fact, Duque did not believe that Kill Jaden did not know that he was causing trouble in the Outland. According to Kill Jaden's personality, after blowing up the Twisted Void back then, it was impossible that Kill Jaden did not turn all the information and clues upside down. It was very likely that the fact that the Infernal Affairs was Mark Dooku had long been exposed. The key was that Kill Jaden was pretending to be stupid. What was he pretending for? If Duque was not a transmigrator, he really did not know what Kill Jaden would do next. What was shameless was that Duque was the kind of transmigrator who used history and future to the extreme. Since the commander of the Burning Legion was pretending to be stupid, Duque would also pretend to be stupid. When the time came, he would see who was the real idiot. Duque had calculated that as long as his main body did not run to the Outland, Kill Jaden would definitely continue to pretend that he did not see him. In this case, what he had to do next was very natural. After a few seconds, 2 voices suddenly sounded on the originally extremely intense battlefield of the ruins of the Twin Towers. One was Vasht's clear and mysterious ancient High Elven language. I, Queen Vasht, hereby declare that I have lost the battle just now. It is the duty of the weak to obey the strong. I choose to pledge allegiance to the great demigod of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. My people, my servants, I now order you to put down your weapons and surrender to the Alliance. Otherwise, go to hell. Vasht's declaration caused a trace of shock to flash in the eyes of all the Nagas. Chapter 1431. The other was the voice of Bulang Bronzebeard. He spoke in the common human language, informed the entire Alliance and Horde army. In the battle at the Serpent Shrine, the Alliance commander Duke Marcus's Karaji twin emperors have successfully defeated the Naga queen Vasht. Now Vasht has surrendered on behalf of all Naga. Take note, do not attack enemies who have laid down their weapons, but for those who resist, kill without mercy. Compared to the Naga side who were at a loss, the Horde's reaction was even more startled. Orgrim's expression was very interesting. At this moment, it was as if all the condiments and sauces in the kitchen had been smashed in his face. Almost at the moment the declaration was made, he realized that the gap between the Horde and the Alliance's combat power had once again been forcibly widened. As the old chief who had personally commanded the cruelest second battle of the Dark Portal, Orgrim knew best what a powerful navy could do. He still remembered those brave warriors who had grown up with him and fought on the front lines with him. They did not die on the bloody battlefield, but drowned helplessly in the water. His companions who were lucky enough to escape did not even have the chance to pull out the fangs of these warriors according to tradition and bring them to their wives and children. The Alliance used the Horde's unfamiliar water battle to shatter the Horde's dream of dominating Azeroth. One had to know that that year, the Alliance still used worn-out sailboats that they did not even bother to look at today. They commanded a group of mediocre Naga and the weakest Murlocs. Could the Naga of the Angry Scales compare to these powerful Naga who were on par with the Horde's elites on land? Sal patted Orgrim's shoulder and shook his head with a smile. The Alliance gained, we didn't lose either. Orgrim was stunned for a moment, then laughed heartily. I was thinking too much. The Draenor expedition this time seemed more like a feast to expand the army and recruit subordinates. The Alliance received the Draenei and a large group of elite Naga, greatly increasing their strength. The Horde was not bad either. Regardless of what those fell orcs would do after regaining their sanity, the biggest obstacle, Zangermarsh, had been cleared. The Horde did not need to fight the undead and crowmen to the death in the Auchinton area. They could completely cross the mainland of Zangermarsh and directly enter Nagran to find their ancestors. Not only that, Orgrim whispered, there are many ogres and goblins in Blade's Edge. Once upon a time, Orgrim had an ogre personal guard. It was an assault force that was extremely terrifying even today. The ogre's strong bodies allowed them to wear the thickest armor effortlessly. They were living tanks in human form. In the Battle of the Scorching Canyon, this 100-man guard was killed and wounded. They were killed by the Alliance's most powerful artillery and the Paladins of the Silver Hand. When they died, they dragged 30 times their number of Alliance soldiers down with them. As long as the ogres were armed and placed in a place where cannons and other heavy weapons couldn't reach them, they would still be a terrifying existence on the battlefield. Not to mention Goblin, the most powerful killing machine in our world since ancient times. Thinking of this, the two generations of great tribal chiefs felt a little excited. The Alliance ate the meat while the tribe drank the soup. At the very least, the tribe didn't get nothing. Vashj led the entire army to surrender to the Alliance, and this had a huge impact on the Alliance. Whether it was on a tactical or strategic level, it had earth-shattering significance. The entire supply line of the Alliance was opened. Because the Kolaifang Reservoir no longer crazily drew water from the Hellfire Peninsula, the barrenness and water shortage of the Hellfire Peninsula was greatly alleviated. In time, it could even fill the entire sunken path of glory with water, forming a canal. The transport capacity of river transport was many times greater than that of land transport, and it saved even more fuel. The tribe directly split into two groups, with Orgrim leading the main force into Blade's Edge. Although it was said that they were going to wipe out the remaining fell orcs, it was actually to recruit strong men. Sar led a division of 5,000 people and ran to Nagran to acknowledge his ancestors. If there were no accidents, he would receive the shaman's inheritance and become the original shaman in history who was an elemental and enhancement shaman. While the tribe was busy recruiting strong men, the Alliance couldn't be idle either. Without the suppression of the tribe's main force, the undead and crowmen in the Auchinton area rebelled. At the most exaggerated point, they even killed their way to the outskirts of Shotrath City. Left with no choice, William could only lead the army and wipe out the crowmen first. On the other hand, to allow the Alliance's main force to wipe out the crowmen with more peace of mind, Duque, who was freed up, led the mechanized army into Moonshadow Valley. They built a city in the middle of Moonshadow Valley, less than 300 kilometers away from Illidan's lair, the Black Temple. Because the dwarves were the main force and they had to use a large number of air forces, it was naturally called the Wildhammer Fortress. On the surface, Mark Dooku brought Iriel with him, strolling around and looking around, as if he had nothing to do all day and was blindly giving orders. In reality, Duque had been secretly busy consolidating the forces under Vashj. Vashj had been the Kolaifang queen for so long, and she had accumulated a lot of power. Most of the aquatic monsters and leaders chose to obey. Only the swamp giants were not smart, or the dark energy they had been injected previously made them more violent. They were the most incisive rebels. In addition, there was also Leotheras the Blind. In this life, he wasn't as crazy as he was in history, but instead became Illidan's loyal follower. Originally, Duque wanted to control him, but in the end this guy was stubbornly resisting, so he could only let him die. After consolidating Vashj's forces and letting Vashj's loyal Deepwater Lord Carathelas take control of the army, Duque let Vashj pass through the dark portal and come to Karazhan. "Dear master, where are you taking me?" Vashj, who was completely in human form, followed Duque through one hall after another, and finally came to a vast balcony. This was where the Night Bane used to be, and Duque had also resisted the invasion of Nazul, who was still the great chieftain. Now this was just a window to the outside world of Karazhan. 10 steps away from Vashj, Duque stood still with his hands behind his back. The atmosphere in the air seemed to have quietened down because of what was about to happen next. The surroundings were silent, and only the soft moonlight shone on Duque's body. "Seleka, do you know? Everyone has to be responsible for what they have done." Duque seemed to say these words without rhyme or reason. "Master, did Seleka do something wrong?" Vashj lowered her head, and there was a sense of grievance in her voice. "Well, you did do something wrong. Do you remember that you once led an army to attack Kul Tiras and killed Crown Prince Tandred's family?" Duque's words suddenly made Vashj's face turn whiter than white paper, and there was not a trace of blood on her pale face. Chapter 1432. Even the quick-witted Vashti could not say anything in this situation. No matter what she said, it was a fact that joining the Burning Legion had destroyed the entire cult Tiras. The most terrible thing was that Jaina Proudmoore was one of Duque's divine daughters. Duque seemed to be talking about something that had nothing to do with her. I value Jaina very much. She is one of the few mortals who has the opportunity to become a demigod. Once I become a true god, she will be my follower. At this moment, Vashti's whole body was shaking like a sieve. Since Jaina had a grudge against her, then the best way to solve the grudge was, of course, to sacrifice her, the little maid. Was there a need to say it? At this moment, Vashti really felt extremely bitter. She did not surrender on impulse. She had carefully studied Duque's actions. The Alliance and the Horde had fought for so many years and had a blood feud with each other, but in order to fight against the Scourge Army and the Burning Legion, they joined forces. The Horde took in the Forgotten, who were regarded as taboo by the Alliance. The Alliance maintained silence and calmly accepted this fact. The Karaji insect people swept through half of the Kalimdor continent. The Alliance took in the Karaji insect people, and the Horde did not even let out a fart. Who knew that when she took all the Nagas to join Duque, Duque would actually say that he wanted to settle the score? For a moment, Vashti was really full of grief and indignation. What was the difference between this and being attacked by a dog? But she had no choice but to surrender at that time. Duque was already ready to take action himself. Even if Duque did not take action, her useless subordinates could not take down the Twin Tower Fortress, and if she continued to resist, she would definitely die at the hands of the Twin Emperors first. At this moment, Vashti broke down. For a moment, countless negative thoughts filled Vashti's mind. If she stubbornly resisted to the end, maybe she would not have to suffer such a humiliating defeat? Maybe her subordinates could succeed? Or maybe Illidan would be merciful and come to help her. Her mind was full of messy thoughts. More than one impulse emerged, urging her to make a last stand. But in the end, the only thing that came out of those squirming red lips was a humiliating plea. Master Duke, do you really want your Celia to die? Duque turned his head and looked at the sky, bathing his face in the moonlight. After a long time he let out a long sigh. Merit must be rewarded, mistakes must be investigated, and enmity must be avenged. This has always been my principle. As a leader, if the rewards and punishments were unclear, the people around him would naturally be divided. If you can't even lead the people around you, you can forget about leading the entire Alliance or even the entire Azeroth. Vashti didn't say anything. She knelt down and slowly stretched out her trembling hands to grab the corner of Duque's clothes. Duque did not dare to turn back to look at that beautiful face that was filled with despair and sorrow. He was afraid that his heart would soften. In the end, he did not turn back. Merit will be rewarded and mistakes will be investigated. I've given you a chance. It's up to you to see if you can grasp it. With that, Duque suddenly pulled back his robe and disappeared in front of Vashti in a flash. Master. Vashti hugged him fiercely, but what she hugged was only nothingness. Her whole body froze. After a few seconds, she came back to her senses and suddenly laughed wildly. My good master, your so-called chance is to let me die in the hands of your woman and let her vent her anger? Great. You are so great. You are indeed the chosen king of the humans. It was an unbridled and desperate laughter. It was the self-hatred of being abandoned after giving everything. It was the wailing of being kicked into the endless abyss after thinking that she was saved. After laughing and crying for a long time, Vashti came back to her senses and found herself surrounded. To be precise, she was not surrounded. A large group of people stood outside a powerful protective magic array. In the array there was only her and Jaina Proudmoore. This was clearly a magic version of a gladiator arena. Are you here to kill me? As soon as she asked, Vashti realized that her question was a bit redundant. She did not recognize any of the people outside the magic array. She was very familiar with the coat of arms on their chests, Kurtiras. Needless to say, Jaina wanted to kill her enemy in front of all the higher-ups of Kurtiras. Selfless revenge in the face of national calamity? What a joke. She did not do it before because it was not time yet. If she did not kill Vashti with her own hands, how could she appease the anger in her heart? Not to mention her, even all the generals and ministers under her would be indignant. Archimonde, who had tortured and killed the previous king Dylin, was already hanging on Mount Hyjal, and the grass on his grave was 3 feet high. Even if the last blow was stabbed by Duque, Jaina, who had personally participated in the Archimonde crusade, had received the initial recognition of the people of Kurtiras. As long as Jaina put an end to the death of the previous king and crown prince, it would be a perfect succession for the people of Kurtiras. Jaina held the staff in her hand, and a cold frost aura suddenly erupted from her body like a blizzard, dyeing the entire balcony snow-white in a few seconds. Bash. I, the current queen of Kurtiras, Jaina Proudmoore, am here to collect a blood debt from you for the death of my brother Thandred's family. What else could Vash say? Apart from extreme despair and indignation, she had nothing else to say. In the next moment she had already activated the ultimate transformation spell, turning into the ugly appearance that was hated by the world and even by herself, a naga with 6 arms and a snake tail. The middle hand on her right crooked her index finger at Jaina. This gesture only meant one thing: come. Jaina let out a soft shout, activating all the magic circuits in her body. The magic that she had cultivated over the past few years poured out at this moment. This was definitely not a fair duel. It was more like a one-sided massacre. After leaving the water environment, the Naga's combat power would drop by at least 20% to 30%. As the mistress of Karazhan, Jaina had authority second only to Duque. The wizard tower was the domain of the wizards, and as the old demigod Mediva's inheritance, the wizard tower itself was already formidable enough. In addition, Karazhan was the core of the entire Azeroth weave. To start a battle in such a place, not to mention Vashj, who had reached the level of a demigod, even Si Thun would probably kneel if he came here alone. The intense battle with no suspense only lasted for 15 minutes. An ice greatsword condensed from the void and shot out like lightning, piercing through Vashj's chest and nailing her to the ground. She did not beg for mercy, nor did she beg for mercy. In the end, Vashj only looked up at the soft moonlight in the sky with her unfocused eyes, and all that was left was confusion. Are you satisfied? You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.